The last thing to make our repository pattern more efficient is to add a unit of work that will wrap all of the categories inside itself. So inside the iRepository folder, let me add a new interface and I will call that iUnitOfWork. This will be a public interface and it will implement the iDisposable. Now, as I said before, this unit of work is nothing but a parent of all the repositories. So here we will have our iCategory repository. Let me call that as category, and we will only have the get method because we want to access our category repository using unit of work. So it is just a getter to access the iCategory repository. On top of that, I said before that inside the repositories itself, we do not implement the save method because it is a generic method to save all the changes no matter how many repositories were updated. So that method will be implemented at unit of work level. We will call that void save. That's all that we have in unit of work. Its purpose is pretty simple. It is just a wrapper for all the repositories in your project. That being said, we have to implement the unit of work. So inside repository folder, we will add a class here, which will be unit of work. Let's add that. This will be a public class, and since inside unit of work, we have to implement the save method that will work with the DB context. So we will have to add DB context using dependency injection. We will have private read-only application DB context, and in constructor we will get that with dependency injection. We will say underscore DB is equal to DB. Now we need the iCategory repository right here, so let me add that. We will add the using statement. Here we will have a getter and setter. I forgot to give this a name. Let me call this category. But when we set this, we won't be setting it anywhere else in the application. It will be inside the constructor. So this will be a private setter. Before we move forward, this will implement the iUnit of work. Let me do that and implement the interface. Inside the dispose method, we will just say underscore db.dispose, and when we have to save anything, it is underscore db.save changes. Pretty simple. Last thing that we have to do is we have a private setter for our category. So inside the constructor here, we will say category is equal to new. This will be of the type category repository, and we need to pass the DB context. So here we can pass underscore DB, and that will create the category repository when we work with unit of work. That is all the configuration that was needed for unit of work. Let's see how we can use this in the next video. Now that we have done all the hard work of setting up our unit of work, let's see that in action. The first thing that we have to do is we need to add that to our container. Previously we added the iCategory repository, but that is not needed anymore. We have the wrapper, which is iUnit of work, and the implementation is inside unit of work. Once we add the service to our container, we can get an implementation of that inside our Blazor pages. So let me save this and close everything else here. Let's open up the index.cshtml. We need the page model. Here, rather than iCategory repository, we need the unit of work. Let me change this to unit of work here, and we will get that using dependency injection. Perfect. Then if we scroll down, we need to retrieve all the categories here. This time we will say unit of work, and inside there we have category repository with the name of category. On there we have the get all, and that looks good. Next thing we want to update is the edit functionality. Let's go to index and copy the dependency injection part. Let's paste it right here. We need the category. Let me cut that and paste it here. We will change the constructor name, and that looks good. Let me add the using statement. Then inside onGet, we have unit of work dot category, and we have the get first dot default. We need the lambda expression. So u goes to u.id is equal to the id. Based on that, it will retrieve the category which matches the ID that is provided. Let's go to our post implementation, and rather than _db, we just need unit of work. Instead of save changes, the method is save, and perfect. Next we have the delete. Let's implement that. Go back to the edit. Let me copy the dependency injection, and we will paste that right here. I will just change the constructor name again, add the using statements. Let's scroll down. This will be unit of work dot category dot get first dot default and the lambda expression. Next we have the post handler here. We will say unit of work dot category, and we need the get first dot default. Let me copy that and paste it right here. This time it will be inside category.id. In order to remove, we have unit of work.category.remove. Finally, we will save the changes. So delete also looks good now. Last we have the create. Let's go back to delete, copy the dependency injection. We will paste that inside create and make sure to change the constructor name or else it won't work. Then here we have unit of work dot category dot add and unit of work dot save changes. Let's run our application and try to see if this works. This time we are not using application DB context directly. Everywhere we are using the unit of work when it comes to categories. So perfect, get all is working. Let's try to create a category here. That worked. Let's edit this. That worked, and delete. Perfect. So all the CRUD operations on category are now working, but this time we are using the repository pattern with unit of work. Now that we have seen category using unit of work, it's time for an assignment. What I want you guys to do is implement the food type repository. You will first have to create the interface for food type repository and then implement that inside the food type repository class. After that, you will have to create entries and configure things inside the unit of work interface and the class. Once the configuration is done, then finally you will have to modify the pages of food type, and you will have to use unit of work rather than application DB context. So make sure you practice that assignment. That way you will become more familiar with the repository pattern. I hope you were able to complete this assignment. If not, let's do that together. Let me stop the application here and close all the tabs. We will first start by creating the repository and interface. So I will copy the category repository, paste that, and the interface. Let's modify the interface first. We will call that iFoodType repository. We will copy the name, change it here. This will be on the model of food type, and update will also be food type. I will just call this obj to be generic. Now let's implement this. So inside the copy, I will change this name to food type repository. We will copy that, paste it here. Make sure you are inside the food type repository. Perfect. This will be food type, and then the update here will be on food type. Let's call that obj. We need to retrieve food type from database, so this will be obj.id, and this time we only want to update the name. but this will be obj.name. That looks good. So our iFoodType repository and FoodType repository looks good. Let's go back to unit of work and the interface. We need to create the iFoodType repository. That will be food type, and this will be iFoodType repository. Perfect. Let me copy the I category, paste that here for the iFoodType repository, and we need to initialize that. Let me call this food type here, and food type is equal to new food type repository. Perfect. That's all that we had to do inside the unit of work. Now we need to modify all the pages of food type. So categories looks good. Let me open up all the page model for food type. We need to get the unit of work using dependency injection. We have already done that. Let me do that one more time here. And make sure this will be interface and not unit of work itself. Perfect. Let's go down. We don't need the await. Let's remove that. Underscore unit of work dot food type dot add. To save changes, we have underscore unit of work dot save method. Looks good. Let's go with delete. Actually, let me go back and copy the dependency injection part. Let's work with delete. Paste it here. We will change the constructor name and add the using statement. Let me implement this first in the other two as well. We have edit here and we have index. Let me paste it here. Remove the previous one. We need the IEnumerable. Perfect. Looks good. Let's just change the constructor name here. Add the using statements. And this will be underscore unit of work dot food type dot get all. Index looks good. Let's work on edit here. Do not forget to change the constructor name. Underscore unit of work dot food type, and we have first dot default. U goes to u dot id is equal to the id. Then we have unit of work dot food type dot update and underscore unit of work dot save. Edit looks good. Let me save that. Let's make sure delete is good now. We will use the get first dot default and we'll scroll down. We have the same thing. Let me copy this. Paste it here. The ID will be inside food type dot ID. Then we have unit of work dot food type dot remove and unit of work dot save. Perfect. So with that, delete also looks good, and I believe all the changes are done. Let's run the application and try that out. Let's go to admin, food types. Let me create a new one here. That's perfect. Let's edit that. Great. And delete is also working. So with that, now that our food type and category is looking good, it's time to work on a new model. This will be a complex model as compared to what we learned so far. We will right-click on the models project, add a new class file. This will be the menu item or the product itself. So first, let me make that a public class here, and then what will be all the properties? The first one will be the ID, so we'll say prop int ID. That will be the primary key of the table. We can define explicitly by using key data annotation, but that is not required if the name is ID itself. The next property that we want is name of the menu item, so let me add that. we will make that a required property. After that, we will add a string for description. Then in case of any menu item, we will upload image on the server. So once the image is uploaded, let's store that path of where exactly that image resides inside a string as well. So we will create string. Let me call that image or image URL. Lastly, for any menu item, we will have price. So let me create double and we will say price here. This time I want to use the range validation that we have. The minimum price is $1. Maximum, let me do $1,000, and we can add a custom error message. And we will say price should be between $1 and $1,000. Now that is good for all the properties that we want in menu item. But each menu item will be related to the category and food type table. So here we need an integer. Let's call that food type ID. And next will be category ID. Now this food type and category ID will be foreign keys to the corresponding tables of food type and category. Now how do we add that foreign key relation when we are working with Entity Framework Core? It is super simple than what you would have thought. One way of doing that is we will create a property of the table where this foreign key is. So food type is on the table food type. So we will create a food type object here. This is called as navigation property. Then we will have to add one parameter on top of this food type navigation property that we added. We will add an attribute of foreign key, add a using statement for component model.dataAnnotations.schema. Here inside the double quotes, we will have to type the exact name of the integer property that we have. So what this denotes is this food type ID variable that we have is actually a foreign key of this food type table. That is self-explanatory when you read it. But Entity Framework Core has made things even simple. If the navigation property name is exactly same as the variable here, and if we append just ID after that, then this foreign key is not even needed. It will automatically think that this is the navigation property and do all the bindings by itself. Let me show that when we work with category right here. So we will create the category object. We will name that category. Since the ID here is category followed by ID, it will do all the mappings for foreign key automatically. That is pretty smart. But in order to see this foreign key and everything in action, we will have to add a migration. Let's do that in the next video. Now that the menu item model is created, let's add a migration to see what actually this translates to. We will have to go to Solution Explorer. Let's add a DB set in application DB context here for menu item. Let's go to Tools, Package Manager Console, add migration, add menu item to DB. Perfect, migration got added. Let's examine the code. It's creating a table menu item, name, description, image, price, food type ID, and category ID. Then if you examine the constraints here, you will see we have two foreign key constraints with referential action as cascade. Now if you do not want to be cascade, you can set that to other properties like no action. What referential action here means is that if a food type is deleted, you want the corresponding menu items to be deleted automatically. So based on your requirement, you can update that before you push the changes to database. But you can see, even though inside menu item, we added foreign key only for food type, it automatically added the foreign key for category as well. Because as I said before, if the name is exactly same and you are just adding ID, Entity Framework core will automatically find the mapping. We scroll down, it creates an index on category ID and food type ID, and this looks great. Let's update our database inside the Package Manager console to push the changes. And perfect. If we go back to SQL Server, you will notice a third table would be created, and in the keys, we have primary key and 2 foreign keys. So that is looking great. With that, we have created our menu item and pushed that to the database. Before we work on adding menu item pages in our API web, let's configure menu item and its repository. So inside the repository, let me copy the food type, paste it here. We will change this to menu item repository. Let me also create the interface for that. Let me copy the iMenu item here, change the interface name. This will be on menu item, and update will be menu item. Perfect. Let me modify the menu item repository now. I will change the class name. Let me copy that, paste it in all the places, and the repository will be menu item. This will be menu item, and we need to work on update. With menu item, we want to update the name. Let me paste that 4 more times. We forgot this will be menu item here. After name, we want to update the description. Then we have price. And if we are changing the category ID or the food type ID, we want to change those as well. Last property that we have here is the image. Now think about a scenario. If you are updating any of the properties here, it is most likely possible that you will not upload a new image. So image property should only be updated if it is not null. So here we have if obj from db.image, if that is not null, only then we want to update the image, else we want to keep it the same like it was. So obj.image. This time if you save the changes after doing all of this, it will not update the image. If you were just using the update like _db.update and you provide the entity here, which is obj, even if the image was null, it will remove the existing link of image, and that is not what we want. So that's why if you only want to update certain properties and not all of them, this is the route that you should take. So with this, update looks good in the menu item repository. Last, we need to change the unit of work interface. Let's add a property there for the menu item repository. Perfect. Let's modify our unit of work here. We need to create a new menu item repository. Let's call that menu item, and let's add that in the constructor. Perfect. So with that, all the changes for our unit of work looks good. Let's continue and work on the CRUD operations in the next video. Now we need to work on the API web project, and we need to create a new folder inside admin for menu items. So we will call that as menu items, and in there let me add an index razor page. So we will select the razor page, it will be empty, and index looks good. Let's add that. Let me go back to food types here, index. Let me copy everything in the div here, go back, and I will paste that right here. I will change this to menu item list here. Let's add a link inside underscore layout. We will have one more drop down, copy and paste that. This will be menu items / index, and we will call this menu items. Looks good. Let me close the underscore layout, go back to the index page, and here we will say create new menu item. Then inside the th here, we only had category name, but for menu item, we will have name, price, category, and the food type as well. Now you might be thinking that we only have category ID and food type ID in the database. From there, how will we load the category name and food type name? Do not worry, we will do that one thing at a time. Now in this particular scenario, I do not want any t-body. Let's remove that. And the reason I remove t-body is because I will be using data tables for menu item. We have seen how to load simple tables from the page model with category and food type. This time I want to use data tables. Data tables is a jQuery plugin where you have fancy tables to display data. You have search functionalities, number of items in a row, and pagination have been implemented by default. So it would be great if we can use such a fancy table rather than just t-head and t-body. So how can we use data tables to display list of all the menu items? For that, once the page is loaded, we have to make an API call to retrieve all of the menu items from database and then display them. But we want to do that in the upcoming videos because first we actually have to create a menu item. And then create also will not be so simple. Previously we had ASP page of create, and then for update we had a separate page which was update. Now I want to do both create and update in a single Razor page. So let's call that page as absurd. This is a common terminology where UP stands for update and SERT comes for insert, and it will be doing both insert as well as update. The way you differentiate between both the request is when it is an insert, the menu item ID will be 0. If that menu item ID is greater than 0, that means you want to update an existing menu item. So let's run this project and see the index page. If we go to admin menu items, perfect. If we hover on the create new menu item, this page won't load because that page does not exist. So in the next video, let's create the absurd page and continue. Let's work on creating a menu item. So let me copy the create view that we have for food types. Let me copy that and I will paste that in menu item. Rather than create, we will change that to absurd. And let me copy that absurd. We first go to page model. We have to change the namespace when we copy things. So always be careful with that. I already know the namespace will be menu items as compared to the food type, and the model also, let me call that absurd model based on the name that we changed here. We will change the constructor name. Let's go to the page, and here it will be inside menu items. We have the absurd model. We will first work on the page model here. We will need the unit of work to toggle database, so let's keep that. But here we won't need the food type. We will actually need menu item. Inside the onGet, we do not want to do anything right now. So let's leave that empty. Next, let's work on the view here and display all the properties from menu item. Now, as I said before, we will be working with image uploads inside this form. For image uploads, you will have to add the ENC type multi-part form data inside the form tag right here. Then we have to display the text here to create food type. but this time it will be menu item. Also, as I said before, this page will be used for both create and update. So we need to change this text based on the ID property of the model. If menu item of ID is not equal to 0, then we have to display update. So we can use Blazor syntax right here. We will use the @ sign, and we want to check if model.menuitem.id, if that is not equal to 0, in that case we want to display update, else we want to display create, and then we will just display menu item right here. Now let me just comment the food type that we have right here and run the application. We have one error. Let me see what that is. And we have the post handler. Let's comment that and run the application. This time we will see an error message inside the upsert page. If we go to menu items, create new, that line that we added will throw exception. The reason here is menu item is null. So if you try to access ID inside there, it will of course throw an exception. So to resolve that, if we go back to our upsert page model on get right here, or we can do that in constructor, we can say menu item is equal to new menu item. With that, if you run the application, the ID will now be 0, and you will see create menu item. Perfect. That is working as expected. Now let's go back to the upsert page and add more properties in the next video.